Hi everybody. Well, this is my first video that I'm going to launch on this channel, and I will dub this as part 1 of my Christian mental health journey. Now, the reason why I want to discuss this particular topic is that I have some major problems with the way Christians deal with and think about mental illness, and that being either their own mental illness or the mental illness of others. And as a Christian, this is something that's been on my mind and my heart, and I've shared it with others. But I think it's something that more people need to hear, especially Christians, because I think they have an added element to this whole thing, which, if understood incorrectly, creates a lot of suffering for them. Now, to give you some context, I'm going to have to give you a brief history of my own mental illness journey as a Christian. And it began when I was 17 years old, and it was in the late stages of my parents' marriage. So my parents' marriage had basically deteriorated to the point where life at home was a living hell. So by then I started picking up issues with depression, and that created but it created some academic issues for me at school. And I didn't get really any treatment at the time for it. The only sort of help that I remember getting was one of my teachers, after having missed school for a day due to feeling particularly bad. The teacher gave me a 5-second pep talk and told me, "You're a strong person. You should be able to get over this." And I was like, okay, all right, and sort of carried on with my life as normal. Now, my real problems started when I was 18 years old, after I had a major car accident, which was my fault, and I altered the lives of 2 women permanently. And as a result of that accident, I developed post-traumatic stress disorder. I only picked this up later in the following year, because I was at university studying, and I remember having to study very big zoology and botany textbooks. And I remember, I'm academically inclined, always have been, but I remember not being able to read or remember a single thing in those textbooks. I would read the same sentence 5 times, and I still wouldn't know what I've read, never mind remembering what I've read. So after confiding in my father, I started psychotherapy, and very shortly after that I was referred to a psychiatrist, and I was put on a whole range of antidepressants and anti-anxiety type medications to start treating me for what they believed was a clinical depression with, as they call it, concomitant anxiety. And I couldn't continue with my studies eventually. I dropped out university and went about getting a job so that I could figure things out for myself. But I remember it wasn't long in the beginning of my treatment where I started having a lot of spiritual issues with regards to this depression thing that I was experiencing and being medicated and all that sort of stuff. And I always had this dichotomy in my mind that I was always asking myself, what is this thing? Is my depression causing the spiritual stuff within me, or is my spiritual situation causing this depression? And because I always felt like there was a brick wall between myself and God, and it was very difficult for me to pray most of the time. It was like there was a brick wall between God and myself. And I knew it had something to do with the depression, and I knew it had something to do with my spiritual state, but I was always wondering, which one is it? Is it my spiritual situation causing this depression and causing my sort of alienation from God? Or is it my spiritual state that's causing the depression, and that's causing my alienation from God? So it was always this flick-flack between these two. Which one is it now, And I will answer that in a later stage. But I was always, as long as I remember having this mental health journey, I was always praying from release, from relief, from healing, from my depression, mental illness, anxiety, and whatever the case may be. And it was very difficult for me to pray most of that time. In psychotherapy, I sorted out a whole bunch of issues, except for the actual issue that I went there for in the first place, which was the depression and the post-traumatic stress disorder, which was, figured out by my therapist. And I was in therapy for 2 years, and I fixed a whole bunch of things except for the PTSD and the depression. I had a hard time with the psychiatrists, as I seemed to be a difficult case to treat, as the usual drugs didn't seem to really work well on me. And the psychiatrist never really seemed to listen to what I had to say in terms of how I was feeling and what the stuff was doing to me. I also had an issue that I wasn't 100% compliant with my medication, as I didn't want to be somebody who was going to be medicated and drugged for the rest of their lives because of this disease, if you want to put it that way. I was not comfortable with being labeled as someone who needed to take drugs for the rest of their lives to not be depressed. So I'd take my drugs for a couple of months, 3, 4, maybe 5 months, and then I'd stop. And I'd be like, I'm okay actually without the drugs. And then after about 3 or 4 months, I would crash and burn. And I'd have to spend the next couple of months clawing myself out of this deep depression and anxiety after starting the drugs again. So that was another struggle that I had. What was also an issue was that every 2 to 3 years, the particular drug that I was using at the time would stop working, and then I would have to find a new drug that would work firstly, and go into that. And then after 2-3 years, that new drug would also stop working. Anyway, fast forward 20 years later, and I pretty much used up all the drugs that did work, the whole range of basically SSRIs. And out of desperation, I ended up at a GP that my friend referred me to. And it so turned out that I'd been misdiagnosed for more than 20 years of my life. I was not actually supposed to have had the diagnosis of clinical depression. I was supposed to have had the diagnosis of bipolar disorder 2. Put me on the drugs for bipolar disorder 2, and I resisted the referral to the psychiatrist because of my not so good history with the psychiatrists in the past. But taking the drugs, it wasn't very long, and this fog started lifting off of my life. Within 1.5 years, I was no longer depressed. I was hardly ever anxious. I felt like I had become 80% more intelligent. And I got my work done 60% faster than I had. And I went about re-engineering my life into something that was way, way better than I was living pretty much for the last 20 years plus. And I've never looked back. I've never looked back. So in a very big nutshell, that has been my mental health journey. I can talk a lot more about it, but there's not enough time at this point in time, and that's where there's going to be a part 2, maybe a part 3, maybe a part 4, I'm not sure. But in part 2 of my mental health journey, I would like to talk about what I've learned about Christianity, what I've learned about mental health, and with what I've learned about how Christians deal incorrectly with mental health, either their own mental health or the mental health of others, so that I can perhaps shed some light on some of the same struggles that you might be dealing with, either as someone who suffers from some sort of mental health, or knows somebody in your family, in your friendship circle, or whatever the case may be, who also suffers from mental health. There are lots of erroneous thoughts out there. There's things that make me very angry. There's things that make me very sad. And I'd like to talk about them, because people are getting hurt. They don't have to get hurt. People are dying. Don't have to die, purely because they believe something that is not necessarily true, or they have an incorrect perception of Christianity, mental health, and Christianity and mental health. So catch me in part 2, and we'll dive into that. Got the history behind me, got my intentions behind me. So I'll see you guys in the next one.